50% of white-collar jobs over the next 5 years are going to be destroyed.
That's just going to free up our time to go and do all of the work that we never got done before. What actually will happen is every company is going to take 2, 3, 5, 10 years to deploy this technology.
We're either going to be managing the agents or reviewing the output of agents.
The AI agent is not here to help us be a little bit more productive. It's our job to make the AI agent productive. A lot of our work is going to probably look like that in the future. And that's going to, change almost every single thing about what work looks like.
That agent makes a mistake, a critical mistake.
Yep.
Where does the responsibility lie?
It's going to lie in the human's hands.
All right, Aaron, thanks for joining me.
Hey, thanks for having me / welcome to Box.
Yeah, this is a great office. I'm excited to talk to you about AI agents. You are prolific on X, specifically about agents. So really excited to get your thoughts.
Thank you. I definitely have a weird obsession at this point. So this is what I spend most of my time on.
All right. So I'm here at Box.
Yeah.
A few weeks ago, you put out a public memo. Box is an AI first company.
Yep.
I want to dig into that a little bit. What does that mean? And then kind of how are you transforming the company internally?
Yeah.
So first, what does AI first mean to you?
Yeah, I think probably certainly anybody listening probably has a relatively good sense of this at this point. But basically, it is a way of thinking about your operations and the way that your company works in effectively a fashion where you think through how can AI be applied to every task in the business to make the organization more productive and then ultimately drive more output as an organization. And I think a lot of companies have different kind of approaches that they take. Some will say we want to be AI first, which is to, effectively trying to reduce the total amount of headcount, applied to any given problem. I think that's a totally appropriate, interesting approach. Our approach is a little bit different, which is how do we actually just drive as much, output as possible and use AI as effectively a capability expansion for the company. So how do we effectively just do way more than we ever could before? And that can take on a variety of things. Obviously, AI coding is an easy one. So how do we just build more features? In marketing, it'll mean how do we either deploy more campaigns or tailor those campaigns to more markets? It should also mean that we reduce the time it takes to do any given task across the organization. So we have a lot of situations internally where we find ourselves saying, okay, the typical way that project would have gone would be 2 weeks, but actually we don't want to take 2 weeks anymore on that. Why can't we do that in 2 days? And so we're constantly thinking through how do we work way faster as an organization with the use of AI. So that could be everything from generating content, generating code, deep research on different activities, being able to do frontline customer support. How do we enable our sales reps with better AI kind of across the board?
Yeah. All these tools are so raw. They're so new right now. There's a lot of edge cases which aren't even possible. How are you playing around with the new tools and deploying them internally? And I do want to get to like headcount and how you're thinking about growth of the business. We're going to come back to that in a second. But yeah, how are you playing around with the tools? How are you experimenting? Do you have a team dedicated to that?
So a couple different things. We have a little bit of a group at the executive team that is sort of constantly figuring out where can we go and kind of point all of our strategic effort across the organization. And so that's sort of I hate to call it kind of a council. It's just a group of us that is constantly meeting, figuring out where we can go apply AI. We have, by virtue of being Box, we have AI products internally that we've built, and so a lot of what we use is Box AI to generate as much productivity as possible. And so the examples are pretty straightforward. I'm a sales rep. I'm coming into the company for the first time. I want to learn what's the best way to pitch a customer on a product. Well, we have Box AI on this product called Box Hubs that looks across all of the knowledge related to sales or marketing and then lets you ask questions of that data. So we're enabling a lot of the AI use just within our own product. And then we're encouraging as much experimentation of approved platforms as possible. So, we'll have teams go off and try a bunch of stuff with Cursor and then share those experiences with other teams. So we want to balance sort of a little bit of a top-down directive that says, okay, let's use AI in more places with more of a decentralized approach that basically understands that we're never going to be able to predict in advance all of the great use cases that are out there. So we want people experimenting as much as possible within the guardrails of, okay, systems we trust, where there's no training on customer data, where we know that it's going to be, people accessing data they have access to. And then the only other kind of final point is we're trying to get the best practices to be shared as much as possible internally. So we do things like once a week, we have an internal all hands where everybody gets on a video call and one of the sessions now in that all hands is anybody from the business showing off how they're using AI
Yeah, that's great.
within their workflow. And so every week you're going to get a demo internally of some team using AI, building an agent to automate something. So we want there to be as much sort of, effectively organic creation of these ideas as possible, as much training, within the organization as possible, and experimentation as possible.
And I believe I remember in the memo, you're saying you want your team to do a lot more with the tools that they have. And so how do you encourage them? What are the incentives to help the teams kind of embrace AI, embrace AI tools
Yeah.
rather than thinking, okay, who else can I bring on? What else can I buy?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I mean, we kind of get to do this a little bit on easy mode relative to most organizations, by virtue of being a software company in the AI space in the middle of Silicon Valley. It means that demographically, a lot of the Box employees or Boxers are already kind of wired to like, how do we get as much innovation as possible in how we work? So like, I totally have a lot of sympathy for, people outside of software just trying to navigate this, because you also then have to just do basic, training of like what's going on in the AI space, in the first place. So for us, we already start with a little bit of a head start that's a little bit of an unfair advantage. But then you do have to make sure that you're contemplating, okay, where are the natural points of resistance in an AI rollout? Well, one would be, okay, if I deploy AI, like is your goal just to then go and automate my job away, and then do I have a job at the other end of that? So one thing we've just been, we try to be unbelievably explicit about is our goal is to do more as a company and to arm every single employee to be able to do more. We're not looking at like particular functions, with one exception. We're not looking at functions and saying, okay, let's go, sort of completely shift that sort of, function. The one area that I think we've probably leaned in the most and said, okay, we think that, if we can deflect more and more inbound, let's say customer support cases, what we can go do is actually, create a better experience for our customers, but also redeploy that same set of resources, either the actual people or the dollars, into things like proactive customer success. So one thing that I think helps with a rollout is and maybe the inverse first. The mistake that some companies make is to say, go use AI. And where you can't use AI, that's where we're going to add headcount to the organization. I generally think you want to kind of do the opposite, where you basically say the parts of the organization that are using AI will be the ones that get more budget. And you want to find ways to effectively incentivize or encourage the use of AI across the organization, and one of the mechanisms is say, okay, if you can actually make your organization more efficient, you'll probably be higher on the list of the teams that get the next set of headcount or the next set of budget to go deploy against problems. And so the more you can kind of create these virtuous flywheels or cycles, around adoption, better productivity, more budget, and so on, that I think will lead to a lot more, feeling of safety and comfort as you go in and deploy these solutions.
Yeah, I was curious why people think, okay, how do we just automate away X job, Y job?
Yeah.
But really, if you're able to get so much more productivity out of every employee,
Yeah.
why don't you go tackle new use cases?
Yes.
There's a lot of market out there. There's a lot of problems that haven't even been, the economics weren't viable quite yet.
Yeah.
So I appreciate how you're thinking about
Well,
it.
well, I think the good news, for let's say, kind of anybody, in yeah, doing some of these jobs that maybe, you sort of see, okay, well, am I trying to be automated, away, or whatnot? The companies that treat AI in a very myopic way, and you only go after cost cutting, we're all in competitive industries. There's very few companies that do not have a high degree of competition. And so for every company that decides that they're going to use AI, let's say to reduce expenses, there'll be another company that says we're going to use AI to do more. And the company that can better serve their customers with AI will be the ones that get more customers and higher satisfaction ratings and better products and services delivered. And then those people will be the ones that go and hire more people and grow the functions that are getting higher productivity gains. So I think it's a very temporary phenomenon where you would see even a reduction due to AI, because the talent would then just flow into the areas of the economy where people are seeing productivity gains and then reinvesting. So one example would be, my hunch is in 3 or 5 or 10 years, the size of a small business in terms of headcount coincidentally will be higher, because what will happen is small businesses will be able to actually do more right out of the gate as a small business, which then encourages them to go and build up all of the adjacent functions based on the areas where they've grown. So great example is, one of the classic problems, if you're a 2, 3, 5, 10 person company, every single new hire that you bring on could be like 10 to 20% of your total expense envelope, right?
Yeah.
But like just if I have one person, I only have 10, I've just literally grown my entire expense envelope by 10%, let's just say. There's a lot of activities inside your business where you can't justify growing your entire budget by 10% just to get going with a new marketing campaign, a feature you want to, create, bugs you want to go and close. So what happens is those companies just never get around to that work. Well, now in a world of AI agents, they start to go do that work for you. And then what happens? You build a better product, let's say, or you serve your customers faster. The next set of things you're going to need is maybe more sales reps to go and then talk to those customers that you've just now increased your kind of effectiveness in going and serving. And so what will happen is you'll actually get bigger faster as a small business than you would have pre-AI, simply because you never would have invested in the functions that could have let you grow faster. Because just like there's only a small percentage of SMBs on the planet that take venture capital, let's say. So most SMBs are constrained by their access to capital, resources, talent in their particular domain, and agents basically, goes and explodes that.
Okay, let's continue on that. Dario Amodei, I'm sure you saw, Anthropic CEO,
Yes.
said,
I have some
white,
disagreements with this.
I'm sure you do.
Yes.
White collar bloodbath.
Yes.
50% of white collar jobs over the next 5 years
Yeah.
are going to be destroyed.
Yeah.
Andy Jassy, Amazon CEO, just said they're going to be reducing corporate headcount because of AI's productivity. You have a very different approach. I
Yeah.
tend to actually agree with you.
Yeah.
But what are they getting wrong?
I respect both of those people. So I think my point of view would be, let's just parse the two differently, because it actually represents different concepts. Dario's point, I think, is like a super interesting thought experiment, which is at the pace of AI agents. What would happen in a vacuum if agents, if you extrapolate what agents do from here to 5 years from now, I think like in a purely academic sense, he's probably correct. Which is agents will be able to do many of these jobs. I think the real life experience though will end up being different, because what I tend to think happens, and just as a counterpoint, Alex Wang was recently on the YC podcast that I think articulated this best, which is there's this long tail. I don't know if he said long tail, but there's this work that basically agents continue to fail at, and it's like that last mile. It's the last mile of autonomous driving. It's the last mile of agent work, which is the human does have to review the work. The human does have to orchestrate what the agents are doing. The human does have to kind of incorporate all of the output from the agents. And so I don't think that goes anywhere, even as you get, orders of magnitude improvement of agent effectiveness, because that's just a moving, basically goalpost of then what the humans end up doing with those agents. That's the first thing. Second is, I think there's a lot of stuff that we do that just simply will not be able to be replicated by the agent. It's not the kind of stuff that you send off as a black box task to come back with work. It's the personal interaction that you have to go and do to be able to produce value in the economy. It's the sales rep talking to the customer to go and coordinate, work that needs to get done, or a deal to get done. It's the, lawyers talking together to negotiate a deal or a case. So all of that work, I think we underestimate how much of that both exists, but also how much of that will exist in a world where we don't have to now do all of the drudgery work. So think about a world where we have agents running around handling all the more, let's say, menial tasks that we don't want to do with computers. That's just going to free up our time to go and do all of the work that we never got done before. There's a sort of a kind of a fallacy or paradox called lump of labor fallacy, which is basically this idea that we kind of assume that like we happen to be like we have the right level of employment relative to the amount of demand for services at any given time in the economy, and that sort of under anticipates just like any kind of shift in efficiency, which then, not to like really get super geeky, but like then you add in like Jevons paradox, let's say.
Yeah.
So if I can increase the efficiency of a particular category of work, let's say legal work, or healthcare, or education, or sales, the question is the demand for that set of services greater than the efficiency gain that was caused? And I think there's a lot of categories of work where that's the case, where if I can make it way more efficient to do a marketing campaign, I will get more than a commensurate amount of demand for marketing labor to go and create those campaigns, or for legal work or healthcare and so on. And so the thing that Dario's point doesn't anticipate is actually, do we end up seeing a Jevons paradox for labor, because AI has now made it way more efficient to get output from that labor that we would not have in a vacuum been able to predict.
I made a video
Yeah.
specifically about this, and I proposed that, yes, it's kind of like Jevons paradox. As productivity increases, as productivity per employee increases, we're gonna be able to do so much more.
Yeah.
A lot of the pushback I got was maybe there isn't so much demand.
Yeah.
And how does demand scale with the more supply of solutions you can bring to market?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of, without that counterpoint person right here, it's sort of hard to argue. I would just say they're wrong.
Right?
Because, partly because it's unknowable on both sides.
Yeah.
So my opinion is just that we actually could have substantially more demand. I'll give you a couple examples. I don't know if the last time you've been to a healthcare provider, but my personal experience is that when I call doctors of different kind of topics, and you say, okay, when's the next time you can see me? And they bet probably somewhere say between 2 and 6 months,
Yeah.
depending on the topic.
Yeah.
So, like, to me, that's an instant and obvious sort of example of like the fact that I can't see a doctor for basically any given topic next week on just like instantly on demand. We are probably off by the number of healthcare providers by 2 to 3x would be like my just like quick hunch. So what's happening? Why are those doctors not able to serve clients? Well, there's a lot of administrative work that they have to do. There's they type in, all the notes from each visit that they have to do. So, okay, could AI shrink that by 30%, let's say? Could AI make all the back office operations so much faster? You probably still then, as a result of that, would need to then flood even more, actually doctors or physicians or, nurses in the system as a result of that efficiency gain. So that's healthcare. Maybe that was an easy one. I have a friend who has a Shopify company, and it sells balloons online. And so his business is he has a website and it sells balloons. Pretty actually successful. And I probe all the time like, hey, would this idea work for marketing? We kind of go back and forth. And I'm just gonna make a hunch, and maybe he'll like respond in the comments that it's not accurate. But like, if he could press the button and say, okay, do all my marketing for me, do all my Facebook ads for me, do all my SEM for me, do all my inventory for me. Could he imagine a world where he gets more customers and thus would then hire more people to do supply chains and to do
Yeah.
product development and then engineer the product better? I think the answer would be yes. He's always constrained by his ability to go deploy all of those things for either his own time or his limited team's time. So I just don't think there's any sort of cap on the economy of the amount of demand for so many different categories of service that when we bring AI into and it makes that more efficient, your ability to then see those categories grow as a result.
Yeah, I think healthcare is actually a great example. There's probably not only the delay between when you want to go see a doctor and when you actually get the appointment, but I think there's probably people who are just not willing to wait at all,
Yeah.
right? Or they would ask questions to a doctor more frequently for smaller problems. There's this entire, I'm going to use the word long tail
Yep.
of health concerns that AI could facilitate. So, okay,
Well, and just even one more example. So
please.
at Box, if we look at AI, every AI tool possible to make us more productive. And so like, let's say one category is if we can make our sales reps 10% more productive, classic stat in doing any kind of B2B is sales productivity, which is basically the amount of sales you're bringing in relative to the spend on that sales rep, let's say. If we could add 10% productivity, so you're getting 10% more dollars from a sales standpoint, you have two options. One, you could just be like really happy that you got the 10% more dollars and move on with your life, and now your revenue grows, let's just say. The other scenario is you're really happy, and all of a sudden your sales rep sort of budget allocation process becomes a more attractive thing to put dollars into.
Yeah.
And in our organization, at least, based on how big we believe our market opportunity is, we will just go and put dollars back into sales the moment we can drive productivity gains. And I think there's a lot of functions in most businesses where you have a particular, there's a particular, slowdown in some part of the organization. And if I could make that more efficient, we would actually then go and hire either in that direct function or in corresponding roles that are tied to that function. And that I think is most of the work that we're doing.
Let's talk about what work will look like for humans
Yep.
in the future. There's kind of two paths. We're either going to be managing the agents or reviewing the output of agents. Like maybe it's a spectrum. What's your thoughts on that? Where do we kind of
Yeah.
skew?
Well, this is kind of the most fun one I think at this moment in where AI is to try and explore is what is the future of software and then by extension, what work looks like. So recently my mental model has been, I think most of enterprise software it basically is to digitize and enable the way that we do our work, right? So what do we do all day, right? We go to a computer if you're a knowledge worker and you type a bunch of stuff and you're in meetings and you're coordinating things and you brainstorm. But a lot of the output, a lot of the things that we end up monetizing is happening on that computer, and it's happening at the speed at which you personally can do something, the speed at which you can research something, the speed at which you can write code, the speed at which you can design a marketing asset. And so the company is basically moving at the rate at which you're able to produce something on a computer, again, in a fashion that is coordinated with other internal or external, kind of individuals. So now add AI agents into the picture. And those AI agents, I think 2 years ago we would have thought those AI agents we didn't call them agents, but the AI systems will make what you're doing way faster. So you're writing code and it's typing ahead and it's auto completing the code you want to write. And like, wow, all of a sudden you're writing 30%, more code
Yeah.
because this thing is sort of this extra, accelerant to your work. And that was our mental model, was like, okay, well, now I could write a report and it's probably going to help me type, a couple sentences or a paragraph at a time. Or I'm, responding to a customer and it's going to auto inject the right response to give that customer. And so that was our mental model for the past, probably year and a half post the ChatGPT moment. Was this stuff is really about creating text or images on behalf of the work that we're doing as we're doing that work. Turned out that was wrong. The right mental model is, wait a second, these things, the AI agent is not here to help us be a little bit more productive. It's like totally inverted. It's our job to make the AI agent productive. And the AI agent is not bound by any capacity constraint in how quickly they can type, or the hours of the day that they can work,
Yeah.
or the number of computers that they can access, or the number of places they can be at once. And so in that world, everything flips on its head, right? So enterprise software, as an example, needs to be designed to effectively make it so you're using that software to plan what the AI agent should do, to create the tasks of what it should be working on, to review the ultimate output that it comes up with, to orchestrate and then integrate that work into some bigger picture thing that you're trying to do. And so, if because we're in B2B enterprise software, I sort of think of work and software in one and the same. So that's what software will be designed to do. And so I think that's a lot of what our work will be. Our work will be thinking about, what should I deploy to the AI agent? How clear are my instructions? What is the bigger picture thing I'm trying to do? And then how do I, give it a granular enough task that it will be successful, but not so granular that I'm not, getting any kind of real productivity gain. And then how do I make sure that's the type of task that I can go and incorporate into something else? So, the best examples recently are things like, AI coding. So, I was walking by an engineer, a couple days ago within Box, and he's using Cursor. And I said, how do you use Cursor differently than, let's say, GitHub 2 years ago, Copilot 2 years ago? And it's a pretty fundamental difference, right? It's no longer that the AI is sort of typing ahead as you're writing code. He goes and asks the agent to go and create something. It creates it, and then he's spending his time reviewing the code of the agent. And he basically says that, he's always finding something that it did wrong, and we know why. It's like, these things are probabilistic systems. So, but it literally means he's producing 50% more output, because instead of him having to look up every single class and function and learn that particular, part of the code, the agent is going and doing that, and he can way better spot what the agent did wrong than the accelerant of just it typing ahead of him a little bit faster. So think about that for basically all work. And that was why I got excited about things like, let's say, Codex, because Codex is like almost the ultimate manifestation of this,
Yeah.
right? It's a task queue for agent deployment, right? It's not attempting to be your code editor. It's like, I go to a thing and I ask it to build something, it goes off, works for 10 minutes. I go and check and go through the diffs, and I look through it and review the code. Like, that is probably how a lot of agentic systems will manifest over time. Is you get a task system, you get a prompt, you prompt it, it goes off, does, the equivalent of tens or hundreds of hours of work in a few minutes. You go then review what it did. You grab a chunk of it, you incorporate it into something else. And so a lot of our work is going to probably look like that in the future. And that's going to, change almost every single thing about what looks like.
Are you using Codex or is Box using Codex, I should say?
I'm sure some engineers are. Right now, we've been more in the kind of Cursor deployment mode. But I don't know the official deployment of Codex right now. But we love, ChatGPT products.
as a company like Box becomes more productive, as like Google and all of these companies become insanely productive, do you see any risk of a concentration of power amongst a very few amount of companies? Because really the only constraint seems to be capital in the future.
Yeah.
If knowledge, the cost of knowledge work approaches zero, is there a concentration of power risk there?
There is. It's kind of a trajectory that we've already been on. So I mean, I probably should be more worried about it. But it doesn't feel any different than the path that we've been on. And I think, I think we're in this really fun mode where a brand new startup, and we've seen this with Cursor and,
Yeah.
many AI startups, a brand new startup, Windsurf, Replit, et cetera, with a tenth of the number of engineers or let's say employees previously could get to the same level of revenue. That's insane. That blows my mind, right? And so at the same time where the biggest companies now have the compute, they have the infrastructure, they have nearly unlimited budget to go deploy it, we see small startups that are outgunning those big companies because they've nailed the right innovation at the right time for the user experience. Distribution has come down from a cost standpoint because everybody's on the internet. And so I actually like the startups odds as well at this moment. And so I'm pretty schizophrenic about this topic, which I think it's a great time to be incumbent. It's a great time to be a startup. It's just basically an incredible time to be using technology.
Yeah, and, so you kinda see it as the same dynamic as it's always been. There can be a startup that can go challenge that massive company because they have better taste on how they're putting the experience together. They have some insight that maybe was overlooked by that large
I
company.
think you have to choose your markets wisely, right? So it's probably a very bad time to build a horizontal personal assistant chatbot, right? As a new entrant,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
I think that game is like, we're kind of have seen we've seen the contours of the competitive map a bit. You wouldn't want to lodge like no social network worked, you know, 6 months after Facebook for at least 10 years until TikTok, let's say, because there's like that was the game, and so Facebook was the play. ChatGPT, Grok, Gemini, Claude, like we got the Perplexity. We have the players in the map. There's probably not new players in that space, but man, I can think of more spaces today that are now up for grabs for startups than in the past decade of being in software. Like there's this, I was thinking the other day about this kind of example of, we had like 2008 to 2014 making up a rough time period where like, Uber, Instacart, DoorDash, Airbnb, every one of these companies just got created. And it basically satisfied, most of our core consumer needs, like, travel, food, transportation, music. We covered all of the bases in that window. And then if you missed that window, it was kind of like not a really interesting period for quite some time on the consumer space. AI is kind of a reset of that, which is for consumer and B2B. And it's basically because we now have for the first time a set of categories that previously were never digitized that now AI agents can go and get deployed into.
What's an example of that?
Like kind of everything, like
Yeah.
every category of professional services.
Yeah.
Like the category for software for lawyers or the legal industry has been one of the smallest software categories like in history.
Harvey just raised a bunch.
Right. And so like here's an example. Harvey's market cap is bigger than the entire category of software sort of spend for contract management systems in history. And it's because like lawyers are like, well, we'll just email documents back and forth and we'll review the contracts and we don't need a lot of software to go kind of work on that problem. And all of a sudden, AI agents now is the first time that industry will be digitized in a meaningful way. You can go category by category, healthcare, education, tutoring, life sciences, drug discovery. There's so many spaces that we really never were able to fully digitize that AI now creates markets for. And guess what? If you couldn't have digitized that industry previously, it means there's not a natural incumbent that is just kind of capturing all of that market, which means it's up for grabs for startups. Now, there'll be incumbents that sort of are adjacent to that area of work and that they can enter with agents, and we're going to do that in a number of spaces, let's say. But there's also a great opportunity where, because there's no natural incumbent, some new startup will have the right message at the right time with the right distribution, and there's plenty of opportunity for them. That's why I'm not overly worried about the hyperscalers and
Yeah.
just the fact that there's maybe 5 or 6 AI models. I think there's so much work to be done on top of the models that becomes interesting.
Yeah, I totally agree. I say often scaffolding is really where the investment needs to be right now.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to just
And obviously, I'm extremely biased, but
sure.
we think there's a ton of opportunity there.
Yeah. And I'm going to get to Box being model agnostic,
Yeah,
AI agnostic in a second, but I want to just touch on something that I get asked pretty frequently: personal versus work agents. So for me, I build up this long history with ChatGPT, with Claude. I mean, ChatGPT really has amazing memory. Memory as the kind of feature is incredible, and I'm thinking, where is that delineation between my personal agent and the work
yeah,
agent? Because I feel like if I have this personal agent that has developed a shorthand with me,
yeah,
that knows me, knows what I want to do, and then I bring that to work,
yeah,
that could be incredible.
yeah.
But then, of course, there's all these IP issues, and yeah, okay, thought about this.
Yeah, no, well, I mean, memory is gonna be one of the funniest, technical problems
Yeah, yeah,
because, um, so I can't even contemplate the combination of personal memory, into this, like, even just, like, even the personal memory in the personal staying in the personal domain is a hard enough problem. Injecting the personal memory into your corporate kind of AI agent system is like that's going to be that'll be some interesting kind of questions. You can instantly think of all the problems, right? So if I have a lot of personal health stuff that I'm doing with an AI system, and then I bring that into a corporate environment, all of a sudden and that sort of influences in some unknown way some set of decisions or things that are going on unbeknownst to me, that's going to be a huge problem. So
yeah,
I think you're going to need church and state between the personal side and the corporate side, which will mean that you maybe don't ever fully maximize the benefits of AI kind of memory, but you probably have to make some trade off on kind of like appropriateness and ability to govern these things versus the full maximum value. Even on the personal side, you run into this tricky thing, which is like sometimes I have a lot of conversations with an AI system that are totally hypothetical or not even about me. And you don't necessarily want the AI getting confused that those are like important things to remember or attributes. Like, and so,
interesting.
you have this balance of like some things I definitely want it to be reincorporated and I wanted to know about for future questions. And then other things are like, that was a weird temporary period that lasted, a week. And I don't need you
Yeah,
to, I don't need you to remember that or think that that's some kind of ongoing, problem I'm dealing with or thinking about. These are the things again where when we anthropomorphize AI, we're gonna get some of these things wrong as a human. While obviously that's like in our brain somewhere, we tend to be able to be like, okay, I'm just like not factoring that in because I know that part of the embedding space is just totally irrelevant to this answer I'm giving. The AI model it's going to be a lot harder for the AI to know when to incorporate those, that part of the context window and when not.
yeah.
So I'm very curious how this is going to work. And then you also have this issue of memory portability, which is going to be another problem. Which is okay if I do years and years of interaction with ChatGPT and I have no ability to make that portable with Gemini or Anthropic. How am I going to feel about that in the future?
Yeah,
Big,
absolutely.
big questions. So I think it'd be fun as an industry if we had a standardized, kind of, context window insert that was sort of like, okay, here's a bunch of knowledge. It's like my personal card of data that I give to AI systems. Maybe somebody could, start to create a spec on that and we'd all support it.
It feels very similar to what MCP did, right? For agent tools. It just feels like there should be an open standard for agent memory where I'm specifically talking about personal
Yeah.
memory, right? So you can go from Google, you can go to OpenAI, you can go to Microsoft.
Yeah.
And then there's, obviously I want to talk about the context of enterprise with memory.
Yeah.
So let's stay within the
Sure.
full context of enterprise. I worked for Box for 5 years. I build up this memory, then I leave the memory, it's IP of Box. It stays
Yes.
with Box.
Yeah.
Then I go somewhere else and I start to have to develop that entire thing again. It seems like it's like completely starting from scratch.
Yeah.
Is there something you can envision Box doing when you hire an employee from somewhere else to help onboard them more quickly to the agent? It's
Yeah.
really that
Yeah. Yeah.
employee's agent. What
Yeah.
what does that look like?
I mean, now we're just brainstorming in real
Yeah,
time.
yeah.
So we have like breaking, spec news on this podcast. I think it's a very cool idea. I mean, I think you could imagine um, you could imagine a file that is sort of like your like agent resume, but like on crack, which is just like here's a 30 20-page document that just knows every single thing about me, how I work, the kind of style of text that I work in. I'm in marketing,
And that would be personal.
and that'd be personal. And but again, we're just brainstorming. But like,
Sure. Yeah.
I see no reason why again some kind of agentic memory that you get as a right of an employee or a citizen or in a healthcare provider, I think that's super relevant. There's an interesting kind of analogous thing that was attempted in healthcare under the Obama administration. Sort of your ability to get your access to your medical records was like a really big thing. The challenge was it was so unusable that basically no consumer has ever really been able to interact with these things. So you'd have to solve this issue, which is like for us and for anybody listening, like yeah, sure, we'd love a portable JSON file that has our AI memory, but like for our parents, like okay, how are they ever going to actually be able to pull that off? But I think it makes sense, and hopefully the industry supports things like this over time.
Yeah. I wanna talk about responsibility, agent responsibility specifically. Agents are non-deterministic, they're probabilistic. As you said, they can make mistakes. They do make mistakes, especially now. They're gonna get better. If I am an employee and I'm deploying agents and that agent makes a mistake, a critical mistake,
Yep.
where does the responsibility lie and how do you manage that?
I mean, for the foreseeable future, it's going to lie in the human's hands. There's just no way. There's no way around that because there's no agentic system that is good enough that you could basically kind of go on full autopilot and just say we are fine with that thing making all the decisions. Until you are fine with the AI making a final key decision, it means that the system is not good enough to remove the human in the loop at some part or in some degree of granularity in that workflow. And so I think most companies that have deployed AI at this point are basically saying, listen, you should use AI. You are still responsible for the thing that the AI is producing. You need to review the code. You need to review the legal document. You need to review the email that you're about to send to the customer. That's on you. People are going to go through, some awkward phase of like, they'll see examples where the human didn't actually review it and they get back some, gibberish thing. And then, that person will need to be, talked to, and there'll be some kind of training session on that. We're going to be in that phase for a while, a couple years, 5 years. At some point, there's a hands off the wheel moment for some scale of workflow, right? And that is, we have not seen a lot of systems that are ready for that or a lot of workflows that are ready for that.
Yeah.
But when that happens, then actually there's a new era of responsibility or governance or liability that will have to emerge. Right now, Box as a platform is liable for a number of categories of events that might happen in our system if a customer experiences those events. And there might be a future state where you will have that level of reliability also on an AI model provider or on an AI system provider. We're not there yet because, again, of how fast the space is moving and where the models are. But I think in 3 or 5 or 10 years from now, if I go to a vendor and I say, I want you to create an AI that writes an application for me, if I have no ability to look into the black box of what that is doing, then I need to be able to hold somebody responsible for when that thing produces a bug. And so at some end state, I think this will be appropriate to hold the provider responsible.
But with lack of a very strong set of guardrails for these AI systems, and you're imagine you're an employee at a company, you're probably going to be very cautious
Yeah.
about deploying them, and isn't that going to slow down innovation? But I guess maybe that's the necessary thing for especially a company like
Yeah.
Fox, where you're dealing with critical elements of
I
a
think
company system.
I think the thing that the one part that we definitely get wrong, and actually maybe tying back to Dario's point, the thing that I think we tend to get wrong is we are all in the trenches seeing this technology and our minds are blown about what it's possible of, and we can extrapolate about what's possible in the future. It turns out like when technology hits the real world, the amount of change management you need to actually incorporate this stuff into the work that we're doing is like 2 orders of magnitude more than we realize. And so this is also why, again, the 5 year kind of analogy or 5 year claim from Dario, I think is wrong, is like that assumes this kind of overnight access to this technology that gets disseminated in an even way faster than the company's ability to go and respond and use it for productivity gains or growth. And it's just pure cost cutting. What actually will happen is every company is going to take 2, 3, 5, 10 years to deploy this technology. And even then,
Yeah.
they'll still be going through various workflows where AI will emerge later in that workflow. We are now somewhere between 18, 19 years into the cloud boom. Like if you just kind of mark it as, let's say, the launch of AWS. And these companies are still growing at double-digit percentage rates,
Yeah.
which is basically definitionally means that most of the market has not fully been captured yet. That there's still this incredible space out there that people are on. I talked to before this podcast. I talked to a company that Their data is in on-premises file shares. That's where their files are being stored 20 years into the cloud movement. And that is like not a small number of those companies. So imagine doing this podcast in 2045 about AI and having that exact same kind of corollary between cloud and AI. We would be talking about it as if it's still this thing that companies are still adopting and doing the change management around. That's how long technology takes to roll out. And so
Does this not feel faster? AI, does it
it's
not feel
it's
faster than
way
what
faster.
cloud?
It's way faster.
Yeah.
But again, what's interesting is that even in an organization where AI fully rolls out to everybody, what happens is our work just shifts upward.
Yeah.
Let's say now we're deploying more, to the AI systems. That will just then feel like normal work. And then there'll be another wave of AI that comes and makes that work more automated. And we will just constantly be doing that. And so this space is absolutely moving way faster than cloud ever did. So let's say you can compress it by 2x, right? So maybe this podcast in 10 years is more appropriate. But the change management of humans is your the ultimate problem. It's not the speed of the technology innovation. It's the speed at which a person can go, okay, like a month ago, I went to ChatGPT and I asked this question, and like the answer was okay. I got to check back in to see if the answer's better. Oh, it's better. Now, how do I incorporate this in my workflow?
Yeah.
And I got to wire that up, and now I have to do some automation thing where I build an agent. Like that has to happen billions and billions of times through the economy for all of this productivity gain to actually get realized within the economy. That's just going to take years, no matter what.
One more question about agents. I'm sure we're
Yeah.
going to come back to it, but there seems to be three groups of folks building agents. There are SaaS companies like yourself, there are model providers like OpenAI, and then there are agentic frameworks like Crew and LangChain. Who is ultimately going to own the agents at the end of the day?
Um, are you allowing for basically no answer, or all the above? I think I need an
Anything in
all.
between.
I think I need an all the above
Yeah.
answer. I think that, I used to think in these sort of zero sum ways. Like when the cloud wave was first starting, like the mindset was like, oh my god, Amazon will just have all the world's compute, and like CRM, like Salesforce will have like all the world's CRM. And there'll be like 5 or 7 providers because like how much enterprise software do you actually need? Like you only need like 10 apps. Fast forward again, nearly 20 years later, there's 4 or 5 big hyperscalers that are all tens of billions of dollars of revenue. There are, I'm going to make up a number, hundreds of companies in the, let's say, 500 million in revenue and above range, or at least few hundred million in revenue and above range. How did that happen? Why wasn't it a winner take all market where like you got all of your SaaS from 3 or 4 vendors and all of your compute from 1 or 2 providers? It's because basically like the world wants choice.
Yeah.
For every horizontal player, there's a vertical player. For every centralized player, there's a best of breed network of players. We are all doing yin and yangs on somebody else's strategy to serve a part of the market that previously was under kind of exploited or solved. AI agents will have the exact same thing play out, which is there'll be some from the model providers that are really good at a few core things. Every SaaS vendor will have n number of agents tied to their particular products. There'll be other new AI agent infrastructure companies, as you mentioned. And I think, probably all this points to is the need for more interoperability, more standards, more ways that agents can kind of talk to each other and coordinate work, which is why we're extremely big on the 8A protocol that Google launched, MCP from Anthropic, anything that can create, ways of handing off work between agents or better ways of them talking to each other is in our view, very, very good.
Okay, so let's continue down that path. I want to talk about the future of SaaS.
Yep.
Satya Nadella, CEO of Microsoft, said the application layer is going to collapse down into agents.
Yep.
First of all, what are your thoughts on that specific quote?
Yeah.
And then also, like, how are you thinking about the vision of where Box can go when
Yeah.
agents start to consume more and more of the application layer?
Yeah, so Satya, that went very viral.
Yeah.
Every B2B founder on the planet was like either freaking out or pissed off or some reaction. But he provoked a good energy in the ecosystem. I think that it's first of all, I think it's super provocative. I like it as a brainstorm kind of idea of like, okay, do I go and talk to agents for all of the things that I want to do? As a result of that, obviously that abstracts away a lot of the value that was created in the kind of GUI and UX layer that so much of our energy has been put into, and it really, does reduce you down to some extent as a database permissions structure workflow system, which obviously would mean, less economics flow to that part of the stack over time. So you have like that as a vector. So you kind of brainstorm that. Then you have this counterpoint, which is okay, but like users actually, like when you do something 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 times, like actually you don't want to go reprompt an AI system every single time for that. Like that's like you kind of want to go to a thing that has buttons or graphs or tables or dashboards. Like that's what a lot of software has helped represent, like what's going on. And again, you don't want to like every day reprompt an AI agent, like tell me today's, revenue. Just like that's like why like God invented dashboards. Like it's just like a solved problem.
Yeah.
So I don't know that everything gets subsumed by the agent from a UX standpoint. I think agents are running in all of these systems everywhere 24/7. And I think that actually, interestingly, and I don't think Satya would disagree with this, I think the SaaS platforms are basically in the most natural prime position to to be deploying AI agents within the context of their particular domain. And so that's sort of why I don't think that these systems get abstracted in a economically disadvantageous way, because if I want to go have an agent answer ITSM questions, deploying that in ServiceNow is sort of the logical way to do that. If I want an agent to help my sales team answer customer support questions or customer, sales questions, Agentforce at Salesforce is sort of the natural way to do that. If I want an agent to run across all my documents at Box, like just having an agent that deeply understands the Box workflows and context is probably the better way to do that. So I think that actually makes the SaaS systems more valuable. One byproduct of the era in which we all got created and scaled was web services APIs were like by default the way that you built SaaS products. Like you have a UI and you have an API, which meant that we're all primed for a world where agents can run, with tool use and run through these systems as basically these kind of super users. And so you have this kind of, basically perfect set of ingredients for agents to be deployed within SaaS. And then to Satya's point, where again, I would agree with him, is those agents then get coordinated maybe in some roll up point within a ChatGPT or a Claude or a Agent Space or a Copilot, where they're all doing work together in the background. And then I might, as a user, interact through a chat system, but I actually still need agents that deeply understand the context of that particular software environment to create value for me.
But aren't agents going to actually write that deterministic part of the UI layer? And depending on what you need as a user, you can prompt once to that agent.
Yeah.
The agent will start to predict what you need and maybe will write the deterministic code for
Yeah,
you so you don't need to
I think
reprompt.
it's possible. I think the thing though is like probably most users don't want to do that.
Yeah.
I think that I'm like extremely bullish on the essence of vibe coding, in the sense of like, wow, like the agent like wrote all this code for me and it like works. I'm very bullish on that, but with a massive nuance. I'm
Yeah.
bullish on it for the IT person that's like, okay, there's this app that the team has always wanted me to go create, and like finally I can get around to creating it. I'm not bullish on it as like Bob in finance is just like, I'm gonna go and like create custom code for my close of books end of quarter process. Like that's just something where like Bob doesn't want the liability or the risk, or like he doesn't want to have to understand like, did it work or did it not work. He just wants a vendor that's just like, it's really good financial software that solves this problem for him. When the auditor comes, he's like, yeah, it was those people, it wasn't my agent code. Like that's what Bob wants. So I think that these markets are going to be insanely large, because actually I think the world needs about 100 times more software. That's different from every person on the planet is going to go and custom code every piece of enterprise software that they interact with. Because I don't think that's what we want to do at work all day long.
Yeah. I want to talk about the future of the web with
Yeah.
you. You talked about APIs, especially like when you're building a SaaS company, you build the UI and then you build the APIs and you expose the API so developers can build on top of you. There have been a lot of browser use frameworks out there
Yeah.
for agents. Do you foresee that as the end state, or is it more likely that we're going to have APIs for everything so agents can browse the web more akin to what they're used to?
Um, yeah, I think this is probably just another one of those categories, which is these last mile questions, right? So I think that this will cause, you know, a 5x or 10x increase in API creation, as well as the ability to describe, either the APIs or the software to the agent. And there will always be this long tail of things, which is just like, even if your API was perfect, for some reason, there's some kind of task coordination between multiple systems, or there's some scraping step that I got to pull something from one UI to another. And the API design is just never, that clean for that particular, pattern of work. And so I think that I'm bullish on both the increase of APIs and the increase of browser use by agents. I think I was playing around with Operator when it launched, and there were lots of use cases that actually no API in the world would be able to solve. Like, watch this video feed, have the agent like alert when something happens differently in the video feed. Well, you're not gonna, there's no like API that would be logical for that. And any API would eventually just approximate what the browser use was doing. It would be a video in API, and that's all the browser use effectively is anyway. And so I think we have some really cool use cases. Like I wouldn't limit our imagination to agents with browsers as basically just using software. I would start to say, what happens when you have basically a full computer screen with unlimited data input as a data feed, and then an agent able to operate on that? What new use cases could you go and have for AI agents? And I think that will absolutely be 10x bigger than we think.
Yeah. And do you foresee a future where the signal to noise ratio becomes so skewed because of, I'll just say, AI slop or
Yeah.
whatever, AI production of assets on the internet, that humans aren't actually visiting websites and there's basically an agent between myself and the web?
I'm I'm nervous about slop for sure.
Yeah.
I'm very nervous about slop. When you think about things like VO3, you're just like, oh my God, in 2 years from now, I don't know what videos will be real. I
Yeah.
barely know what text is real. So I'm concerned about AI slop. Unquestionably, I think ways of verifying human generated content online will become very interesting. Agents as an intermediary between me and the internet, I think is sort of, to me, a little bit independent of the slop factor, and it's more of just a natural byproduct of just our overall agentic use. And you see things like Comet from Perplexity that, like, clearly we're going to have agents somewhere in the flow of our browser or internet use in the future. And there's a lot of kind of cool ideas that get opened up. So, imagine a world where you're giving agents, various tasks, a research task, and that agent has a certain amount of budget that it can use for that research task. And all of a sudden, like, one of the counter problems for the AI training on the internet is that you're going to get more and more private sources of data that get more closed up. But then the solution to that is, agents with a budget that can basically pay that data provider to access information, due to your query. Like, we're going to have some new forms of what agents are now capable of as a result of how the internet evolves due to agents. So there could be like some really interesting new innovations that maybe we never would have gotten if we were just humans on the internet, and we didn't have all of this automation that was occurring.
I'm a bit nervous about the orders of magnitude increase in the echo chamber effect. Very similar to how we saw in social media, the
Yeah.
algorithms feeding you what you already want to see or kind of amplifying fear, anger. I can imagine if there's an agent between me and the entire ocean, the web of information, that issue might become much more substantial than it is today.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's, I'm just glad to not be running a social network, so, that doesn't sound enjoyable at all to try and defend against this.
Yeah. Yeah. All right.
In the B2B space, like, we have different other hard problems, and, fortunately, it's not the bonification of kind of corporations yet.
Where are companies overestimating AI capabilities today? Where do you think? And then on the flip side to that, where are they underestimating? Because you're deep in it, you're
Yeah.
deploying it internally, you're helping your customers deploy it.
I don't get too much on the overestimation side. What I get is a laundry list of, is AI ready for this thing? And what gives me so much optimism and excitement is that list of when I go and we constantly host these sort of 10 or 15 person roundtable conversations with a bunch of CIOs, chief information officers of companies, and we get to kind of hear all their use cases, and the use cases just grow and grow and grow, and they are more and more imaginative. One asterisk back to the earlier part of the conversation. Interesting, most of them are not about labor replacement. It's all usually about capability expansion
Good.
of, like, I have this set of things that my company was never able to get around to, and now agents being able to go and do that would unlock something for me. Like, I've got like a million contracts, and if agents could just read all those contracts, I could then do this new thing as a business. Or if agents could go in and, summarize this information, or take all my, chat logs with customers, I get new sentiment analysis, like all things that they never deployed humans at. And it's just agents being able to solve those use cases. So in the first category, I think we're getting limited amounts of overestimation and more just like, can AI do this? When is it going to be possible to do that? What, can we deploy in this way? Which is great because it means that that is proof that there's going to be dozens or hundreds of great new startups that can go and solve those problems, as well as opportunities for the Boxes and Salesforces and ServiceNows of the world. On the second category, where we're underestimating the use, I think is mostly in back to this category of how we work differently. I think people have not 100% sort of changed their mental model of their relationship with computers to fully kind of capture the sort of relationship of, I deploy something to an AI system and then I review its work, and I help incorporate that work. Just that core premise is, it's just very different from how we use software before. And so you get to this kind of use case where people will try something with AI, and maybe they don't sort of like, they're like, sort of, okay, that turned out okay, or I didn't like it, but they kind of imagine like their job is just to either take the whole thing or nothing.
Yeah.
And they either like did it well or didn't do it well. When actually in reality, like, you should just use it to create some critical mass of the thing you were trying to do. And that should hopefully have solved hours or days worth of work. And you should anticipate that it's going to be off by 2 or 3 or 5%. And so you have to go through and review it. But once you are comfortable with that and you flip your mental model, all of a sudden you can just get so much more done. And there's just so many more use cases that are now possible. I had this, we did this survey recently with a bunch of IT leaders on kind of AI usage in the enterprise, and I used AI to go in and I used AI to go and produce the survey, the base sort of raw skeleton of the survey. And it saved me like 3 to 5 hours of like thinking about like all the different things. And it was just like this incredible sort of starting point to work off of. And it just like, but like I had to still modify a few things, but like it just saved hours and hours that I probably would have punted, which would have meant that we wouldn't have done the project in the first place because I wouldn't have had something to go pitch the team on. And it just like shortcutted a whole amount of work. I still had to do lots of editing, but I was comfortable with the baseline that it started with, just to launch me into this project. And so if you have that mindset, you will find 5 times more ways to use AI in your organization if you're comfortable with the idea that, yeah, the human's still gonna have to do work.
Yeah.
Like, we have not automated the whole thing yet. Like, there's still this long tail that everything is gonna run into.
I'm glad you said that. And this is the last question for you. You are extremely prolific on X. You put out a lot of great content. Where is AI helping you in there? Is it writing your post for you? Like what does
Yep.
that balance look like? And yeah, what is your workflow?
Yeah, so for stuff like on X, or let's say LinkedIn or whatever, just like if I'm posting a thought on some AI topic, that's essentially all me. Like,
Okay.
short of a spelling kind of thing, if I'm just like, okay, is it R or is? Like, sometimes I'm just like, okay, that's a weird, how do I make sure that one's right? And the reason that I still force myself to write all of that is simply because the space is changing so fast, and I need to make sure that I'm comfortable myself in my understanding of it.
Yeah, clarity of
And
ideas.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
and I'm like, I think, PG is like a big, kind of obviously thought leader on this, on just like writing is this just important skill. And I think I grew up that way in thinking about strategy memos, and just how do you really think through everything that you're working on. So I write it all, and it's like I enjoy it, and it forces me to, again, kind of like think through like all of the consequences, all of the downstream effects of what's happening. Now, what catalyzes the writing is usually something that's happening in the real world. So I'll come from a conversation with our head of engineering or our CTO. I'll get out of a meeting with a customer. I'll see some breakthrough. And then that sparks, okay, like, what will agents do in this case? What will the business model be in that case? Like, anytime I'm writing about like business models of AI agents, you can almost guarantee that 2 hours prior, there was a conversation internally about the business model of AI agents in Box. And I'm just kind of capturing some of these inherent questions that we kind of run into on those topics.
Are you ideating with AI? Are you kind of
Not for that stuff.
not for that stuff? Aaron, thank you very
Thank
much
you.
for talking with me today.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate it.